Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for taking time from your Friday. And I know that all of us are going through so much Zoom fatigue, but I hope that we can make this as interactive and real and really get to see and discuss some of the possibilities of what could be next. Because there's so much going on in terms of how people are suffering, in terms of how places are getting distressed, in terms of the different ways practice is evolving. And it's really important for us to take a reflective moment to understand what would be the new model where all these pieces start to come together. So I'm going to begin. I'm a big person with images, and I think images speak more than 1,000 words, forgive the cliche. But really, this is the human face of water scarcity. This is an image from the city that I grew up in, New Delhi, India, and it is a mega city of almost 25 to 30 million people, if you really start to count them all. And water scarcity has historically been one of the big problems, both in Delhi and across the world. It doesn't end there, of course. Some of the biggest challenges currently that face us as humankind is the whole human face of genocide and war that we never get to see. About how we just hear news clips and see pictures like this, but really we never understand that this genocide and war and the effects of it have been going on for quite a long time and have created extraordinary disruptions in many ways. Then, of course, there's climate change, and some of us are doing better than others. This is an image from the city of Amsterdam, where cycling and pedestrians are very much in the forefront. But that is not generally the case in other areas. And definitely, combating climate change has become one of the big areas where we have had to put our energies, and we continue to. This, of course, is in a way the human face of racial injustice. And I believe this picture is taken from one of the articles in Smithsonian where they featured the Great Migration. And it's important to know that because of the way we view people, or rather don't view people, we always have a human face of racial injustice that we often don't see while we are planning. And it's really important for us to understand that it is not a numbers game, that it is not about the best technology. It's really about what is it that we are doing and how does it actually impact people. So we all probably agree that these are the four most pressing issues, or four of the most pressing issues that we are facing on our planet today. But of course, the challenge and the issue that is forefront in our minds is, of course, this COVID-19 pandemic. So just looking at what's going on with numbers at a glance, since the time COVID-19 first was detected in the United States, which was 208 days ago, we have had 152,000 deaths, which really averages to about 732 deaths per day. Let's stop for a moment, folks. Let's think about what 732 deaths per day mean. Look in your immediate neighborhood. If all the people around you just died, even then it would be less than the 732 deaths a day. And you know what is most ironic? That just in 1 year, the United States has spent $3.7 trillion on healthcare. But that is not the end of the story. It's not just about COVID. I have a few figures here, which may be very, very interesting to all of you, is that if we are looking at this kind of spending that has taken place in the United States, the OECD data for the OECD countries suggests that we are actually, let me see, spending about 2.5 times more than Japan does, with much, much poorer outcomes. And Japan, for example, has a lot of older population, and therefore the vulnerability is extraordinary. Again, we are spending more than Germany. They are doing really well compared to the United States. And we are spending more than most, almost 2.5 times more than most of the OECD countries in the world. But once again, we need to remember that despite all of that, we have 732 deaths averaging per day. And that is not a small number. There are numbers for everything, right? There's numbers for healthcare. So let's look at education, and let's look at how we are faring with education. And a few numbers there. We spend almost $13,084 per student just in elementary and secondary education alone. And yet, that number is 39% higher. Let's understand this. 39% higher than the average spending of OECD countries. So really, our heart's in the right place. But when we start to look at the outcomes, we only rank 25th in the average OECD school enrollments. 25th, folks, which is, just to give you for perspective, we rank behind Korea, Sweden, Hungary, the Slovak Republic, and so many other countries which are also not considered at the same developmental rate as the United States. So really, at the end of it all, the question then becomes, why is there such a disconnect between spending and outcome? And this is a question that can be looked at and analyzed in so many different ways, but be it for transportation, be it for healthcare, be it for education, again and again and again, our capacity in the United States, our technology, the experts that we have, the people that are connected, the amount of money we spend, all those things do not add up to the outcome. In fact, it has become obvious that many countries are spending much less than we are, and yet they are able to find better, more equitable outcomes, which are becoming more and more better and progressing every day. So in the end, the question is really about planning. And by planning, I'm not talking about city planning. I'm not talking about parks or playgrounds, or I mean, I would, but really I'm using the term planning as a very generalized act to plan something. So no matter what we plan for, whether it's education policies, whether it's the way refugee settlements can be, the refugees can be assimilated back, the way we look at climate change, really, in the end, it is not about these issues. It is not about the amount of PPE, or the amount of doctors that we have on the ground. In the end, how do these plans affect all people and the places that they live in? And this really becomes the larger question. So let's stop for a moment and let me tell you a short story. So once upon a time in a neighborhood, which is not too far away from where I live, there was this area which was really derelict, and the kids used to run away to come and be in these areas, so that it was considered unsafe. And really, from an environmental standpoint, from a crime standpoint, from a livability standpoint, this was anything but a habitable space in the neighborhood. But then something wonderful happened. Looking at what was going on in the neighborhood, the folks of the neighborhood got together and they spoke with each other and they connected and they got their efforts together and created this wonderful park where the kids in the neighborhood started to play, where there was not crime anymore, there were trees growing, there was lighting. And finally, with this concerted effort and planning for the people and their needs, they got to a point where things like this started to happen in the neighborhood. But not for long. Unfortunately, as the place became better and better, as the neighborhood became more and more improved, the kids, the very kids and the people of the neighborhood for whom they had gotten together and built this wonderful place started to get marginalized. And gentrification started to take place in the neighborhood, and the parks that was once meant for people and kids who needed it the most were really the parks that increased the land value and the housing prices, and eventually those people of lower income and people of color were driven out. So let's step back for a minute from that story and let's think about why these things happen. If we start to look at our policy and planning instruments, they almost always are based on quantitative outcomes, meaning how much is this going to cost, how much money can we, what is the return on investment, who are the people who are going to come in, what is the tax base, if there are things that could be done cheaper, why would we put some added value to something? So there's all these parameters that go into the decision-making processes. And almost always the numerical indication is the strongest indication of where the project goes. And that has fundamentally been the premise of all kinds of economic development for the longest time. So let's look at a different type of approach. And in all fairness, this people-based versus place-based approaches is not something new that has been discussed or not something new that I am bringing up. However, it is very, very important for us to understand that these kinds of concepts that we have started to understand and try out are not becoming mainstream enough that they affect the status quo. And that is where the problem lies. So let's talk a little bit about what place-based approaches are and what people-based approaches are. So place-based approaches, like the name suggests, are essentially things that are physical in nature. So for example, shopping centers, parks, riverfront developments, roads, and so on. And people-based planning is generally when you start to provide direct monetary help to people, such as vouchers and income tax breaks and so on. There's another distinction that I would like to make. Place-based planning or development is generally done by market-based forces or dictated by market-based forces. Whereas these kinds of people-based planning is generally done by public entities. But there is a disconnect here. And let me give you an example to talk about this. In the city of Boston, we have the well, not the city of Boston, but we have Section 8 vouchers, which are essentially vouchers for lower income people who are able to take that and subsidize their rents and be able to get housing. And that is, in practice, in its very core, a very, very strong and good idea. However, because these are not connected to the place-based strategies, what happens often is that the vouchers where where the neighborhoods where these vouchers are accepted are often in the very poor neighborhoods where there are not enough services. And so automatically, by trying to help the people, we are creating pockets and concentrations of poverty, of areas which are environmentally downgraded, and so on. So really, we need to think very, very carefully that these standalone strategies are not going to work by themselves. In fact, the place-based strategies, more often than not, are going to help people who already have a certain level of prosperity within a neighborhood or a society. And the people-based strategies, as we know them now, are generally about more to do with monetary connections and handouts, if you will, than they are things that help to create upward mobility. So we need to find a sweet spot, because we understand that both place-based and people-based strategies have very important things at their core. But we need to understand that to underscore this all, the place-based strategies need to be connected to the people they are trying to serve. Otherwise, they are always going to remain two distinct pieces of the game, and each one will work in isolation, and eventually there's going to be uneven redistribution of public goods and resources. So what matters now, and what should we prioritize? If we start to think about these questions as we move forward, because we have this extraordinary window of opportunity where we can make these things possible, because disruptions often open up these windows of opportunity where not only the faults of the system come to the fore, but also opportunities are created where you can change the processes. So in terms of prioritizing, place-based strategies should be first about public good. Let me give you an example. Often what happens is that in cities and things like that, the money from taxes and so on that is invested back into place are invested back into things like shopping centers, which are more expensive than the people in the neighborhood can afford, or stadiums where only the people who are sports lovers of that particular team will go. So what happens is that though there is investment in place, we need to understand whether that investment by and large is first a public good. And in terms of people, we need to really, really understand that we have to start. One size does not fit all. And we very much have to start with a progressive set of policies where much of the money that is dedicated to these people-based planning should actually go to the people who need it the most. So if we are able to balance these two out and connect them, meaning putting people in the center, making sure that it's not all people, of course it's all people, but first prioritizing for people who need it the most. And then the place improvements become more about public good, than other larger economic investments, and both of those certainly could go hand in hand. The literature, the experience, the cases all suggest that if we are able to prioritize in this manner, we could probably get, break the vicious cycle. So what does this mean for us now? There are so many things that are going to change, are changing, have been changing. But now more so than ever, we can really focus in and start to understand these things because they are happening at a very, very rapid pace. So almost overnight, we went from teaching in the classroom to going remote and talking like how you and I are talking today. And so that has larger ramifications on the way we learn. So everything from looking at the future of education, where online live learning, teleporting, wearing holographic lenses and having presences in virtual rooms and environments, all of those are absolutely fantastic ideas that are going to engage with the technology and if done right, can certainly enhance the future of education. But let's wait for a second. Let's think one more time about the pieces that we have been constantly struggling with societally. This idea of how future-based education can be both people-based and place-based. So if we are looking at technology, we need to look at access. If we are looking at people and who is going to get the front seat for this, we need to look at the students who need it the most and not the ones who already have a certain level of support. It's not because we don't want to cater to all, but practice absolutely dictates that we have to be real about the choices we make. And it is not a neutral zone. All are not equal. And it is really up to us to understand how we can prioritize these future evolutions, if you will, of these very critical sectors, such that the people who need it the most are the ones who are able to get access first. Similarly, in transportation, there is this so much policy and technology and business models that have completely transformed and augmented this space. So for example, we are looking at autonomous vehicles, single user, we're looking at shared vehicles, we're looking at shared and rides such as Uber and other things. But again, it becomes very, very important for us to note that all these investments in our transportation future are, the success of those are absolutely critically linked to how many people can actually use it. So just for context, only about 50% of the people in the United States, 50% folks, have access to any kind of public transportation. So when we think about and are super excited by these new technologies, and believe me, I am, we always need to understand how can we take these ideas, policies, instruments, technologies, and really be able to affect the people or the places where these things are not available. So sort of a leapfrog development, if you will, so that we can all start to come together in an equitable platform. The same is true for the role of our cities. Who does it serve? Who's going to live there? Who's going to get the best spots in the city, the best views, the most environmentally healthy areas, the most access to utilities and hospitals and shopping centers and so on. So these things become very, very important in reframing the way we start to understand how individual monetary pieces or instruments can be linked then to the places which are most desirable to live, or then take the existing places and bring them up to that standard. And of course, last but not the least, in the future of healthcare, so much is happening and there's so much debate. And it has become really, really important for us to understand that the old model obviously has not been working. And again, healthcare is not anything different. It's like transportation, it's like education, it's about water, it's about homelessness, it's about all those things. The parameters are very similar for the decision-making processes. First, prioritize and provide for the people who need it the most, and create place-based strategies or hospitals or infrastructure where the people who need it the most can be connected. Because one without the other is always going to create variation in the distribution of public goods and services. Why does this matter? Why should this be important to us? What do I care if, I don't know, some neighborhood which is, at the other end of this country or even the world does not have water, or if people are actually suffering somewhere because of climate change, or somebody who is in the neighboring state, those kids don't get the same level of education as we do in Massachusetts. Why does it matter? It matters because we are as strong as our weakest link. That means that if in New York City, everybody had equitable access to healthcare, did not have the environmental degradation in their neighborhoods, did not have the systemic racism and poverty which brought them down and created great vulnerabilities. If those pockets in New York City were not there, if all people were given equitable resources, New York City would not have had the kind of COVID pandemic effects that it did. Because no matter how safe I am in my own home, if my neighbor is going to run a generator which emits black clouds of carbon monoxide 24/7, I cannot lock myself in the room in my house and not breathe the air. So it's important for us to understand that by not being equitable in our policies, as much there is a risk to all of us, because when some of us fall sick or some of us don't have the resources or the access, often the shared burden comes to all of us. And we are seeing that in climate change, we are seeing that in our education, we are seeing that in our healthcare, and so much more. So this, I believe, is the last slide, because I really hope to have a very good, strong conversation. I'm not quite sure. What's the time, Andrea? It's 12:05. Great, we do have a little time. So in the end, it is really about connecting people and place and finding the sweet spot. But more importantly, in finding the sweet spot, we have to plan with certain criteria in mind. And those criteria cannot always be quantitative. They have to be, but those quantitative indicators need to be overridden by some very fundamental human aspirations and goals, no matter how technical the project. So for example, we need to plan for the greatest benefits for the largest population. We need to prioritize equity of outcomes. We need to aim for the sweet spot. And context, behaviors, needs of the people always matter. So context always matters. And I am going to set a call that let's look at people first as the way we practice. And there are many, many things that we do both formally and informally here at City Planning, at BU, in the city. It doesn't matter where you are, who you are, but in some way, all of us need to join this people first movement. Thank you. Great.
That was great. Thank you, Dr. Dutta-Koehler. So next, we're going to do our question and answer session. We were discussing about people putting their questions in the chat box, but I think this might be a small enough group and an intimate enough group that if anybody wanted to, if anybody had a question, definitely you can go ahead and ask. So the floor is open.
Let's see. Since I know most of you, should I put people on the spot? No.
It'll be like class.
I'll jump in here.
So lovely to see you. Hi, Arya.
How are you doing? How's everyone doing today? One question that I had pop into my mind on your last slide was how one goes about both planning for the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people, as well as attending to and accommodating marginalized groups, which in a number of places in the world aren't a part of the majority.
It's a good question, Arya. And, I have thought a lot about it. And really, it's not an either or. So let's think about planning for the greatest benefits for the largest population. And then, sort of bringing it down to context. So if we look at the city of Boston, right? And we are looking at housing as a crisis within the city of Boston. So we need to be able to find ways in which we can accommodate and provide the best kind of housing for the most number of people that we can. And that is non-negotiable. However, what I am suggesting is that we need to do this in terms of prioritizing. If this is going to be the ultimate goal, we need to prioritize the people who need it the most first, meaning the poorest people, the people who don't have it. That's where we need to concentrate our efforts or prioritize our efforts first. Does that? Okay. I don't want to keep all of you, but I am happy to answer any questions. Are there any folks who are interested in the program? This is a great time. We have, I think, almost 3 of our faculty. No, they left. But we have me, we have Andrea Ciminelli, Yashim Shungu. So we do have quite a few of our faculty as well as alumni. So this would be a great space if you had any questions, had any interest, want to tell us some examples of your work, of where you're seeing this or how things are changing. Love to hear.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jacob Harrington. I'm an alumni from the Urban Affairs program. Thank you, first of all, for putting on this talk. This is great, really great to engage with this. I guess I had one sort of question, but also kind of just topic that I think deserves some analysis on this. The Green Line extension into Somerville and Medford is, I think it's a great project in terms of public transportation access, but as someone who does follow the project pretty closely, I think most of the news I hear is the place-based news about it. What stations are there? What access is it? But what I don't hear as much is the people-based initiatives around it, or rather effects of it. And so I guess my question is just, what, for a project like that, what would the people-based aspect of it look like in terms of certainly housing is something that I was thinking about, housing affordability in Somerville.
Absolutely. If I may, Jacob, I just want to step back for a minute and try to give an example of a greenway that students in our capstone looked at last year. And essentially, it was about the greenway going along a neighborhood, the essential impetus was, what's the problem? What is missing? Who are the people who need to get there? So if you start to take that to the Green Line extension and other things, I think it is really, there is of course the physical constraints. There is the way the monetary processes are set up, the approvals, other things. But if we were to look at this as a place-based approach, then I think we first need to start with the behaviors of the people, who is commuting, who needs it, and more importantly, who doesn't have anything. And so if it is going to be about the Green Line, then at the same time, part of this larger transportation project needs to be about how do you get the people who don't have access to a point safely and easily and comfortably, so that the people who need it the most can have access. And you have exactly hit the nail on the head. This is exactly how every project is measured: number of stops, number of commuters, how much revenue, how much profit you have made in a transportation project. But very rarely does it go back or even start with, here we are saying start with, looking at who are the people who are affected and how can we make their lives better. And I think that's where the notion of place-based strategies, of people-based strategies should be above place-based strategies. Similarly, if you look at Somerville, and Somerville has a huge housing problem, but every time they build more and more housing, it gets more and more gentrified, which is good in terms of numbers and economic development and other things. And there is a trickle up and trickle down effect of the economy as well. But it is important to understand that whatever we do, those people-based strategies are small and few and far between, and are laborious, like and time-consuming, such as community land trusts and things like that, which are people-based instruments. So I guess I don't have an answer except to say that I agree with you. And I think the time has come for us to challenge this premise. Every time we see a beautiful report, tons of numbers, something that is rationalized and spoken of as it is the best thing that has ever happened, we need to start with our people first strategy and ask the question, who does this matter to most? Whose lives are we benefiting? Or more importantly, are we really helping the people who need it the most? So that, I think, is critical to the way we start thinking about all of this.
I have a question related to that issue, since I haven't been back in Boston for a while and I don't know the details around that particular project. But
hello, Tiana.
One of the things we obviously learned doing, community engagement sessions to meet with the public and ask them these questions. And I'm wondering if anybody knows, has that been done with the neighborhoods that would be impacted by such a project, and getting their feedback on if they like it or don't, or
Absolutely. Community engagement has become the name of the game, right? We are engaging communities all the time, asking for their feedback, this, that. But the fact of the matter remains, and this is something which would be an excellent piece of research, is to go back and look at the level of community engagement in projects and the actual impact of the outcome. And I think community engagement has certainly gained momentum. There's lots of good things happening, and the feedback is now slowly trickling in. But really, this needs to be a movement, because at best, it helps in incremental ways and in smaller scale. But at its worst, it is just a tokenism or a lip service. And we really need to start understanding, is it really about, and this is not because one way is better than the other. We just need to be clear about, what are we trying to do? And also be clear that if we attack the problem in a technical manner, then history and data both suggest that there are going to be unequal outcomes. So that's something which I think we really need to start looking at, because this kind of, and I know we have somebody from the mayor's office, so I'm going to not talk about the specific project, but actually it is a project that BU and the mayor's office did together. And this is absolutely fantastic report that came out, I believe, regarding the carbon neutral plan in Boston. I'm forgetting the exact name. And really, it was one of the best sort of engagements and collaborations between scientific efforts, modeling, geospatial learning, city government, and so on. However, the last piece of that document was an equity report, meaning that nobody looked at from the beginning as to how this project would affect, but rather that was something which was discussed and put aside, and only after the fact it was incorporated in and became an iterative process. So absolutely, things are happening, but we need to be authentic with ourselves, and we need to interrogate our assumptions. And, is this really a process that is making a difference in the way we want it to? Or is this something that we are just doing because we know this is something that is important, but we haven't quite made the shift from understanding that it is important to making it part of our practice?
Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Giordano. I'm in the process of completing my application for the Master of City Planning. First and foremost, I just wanted to say that, I'm thankful that you all are safe and healthy, and, I wish you and your families well. I just had a question for Dr. Dutta-Koehler. I'm kind of piggybacking a little bit off of what Jacob said. And that was one of the things that I've noticed is that a lot of what we treat as very important is based around how we speak. And I think language is one of the most important things. And I noticed that very well in your presentation. And I think people first language is a very important thing that we've all become much more aware of. And I was just wondering, Dr. Dutta-Koehler, if you, in your experience, had noticed that in some of the literature and cases, if people first language was something that became more prominent recently.
Absolutely. I think the position that I feel would be the fair position is that there is not, it's not like people are not doing it at all, planning's not happening with the people first sense, but more often than not, what is happening is that those things are very small in scale, they are incremental, and the things that are making the larger impacts, the decisions, the big money, those are the things where we are really not looking at this people first. So it's not to say that it's absent, is just to say that its presence has not yet become an integral part, if not a starting point for all the things that we are doing or all investments that we are making. And if we do not become aware of this and consciously think about what we can do to gain momentum, to create a movement, and thereby make this way of thinking and doing status quo, then we really need to start looking at not only the things that we do, which are one-off, but in a very systemic manner, from the big to the small, from the everyday to the future. And those are the things that we have to be aware and you know, because it's not that we don't know, it's not that we are not sensitive, it's not that we don't want to do so, but definitely, despite all that investment, despite all that effort, despite all that you know, will to do good, often we are letting the process, the inertia of the quantitative process take over the way we are doing things. I don't know, Matt, if that helps. It's no easy answer, you know, it's never a yes or a no or a black or a white, but certainly within the spectrum, for something to go from awareness to movement, we need to start to understand fundamentally how these changes can be incorporated in everything we do. Great. Last call for questions. If you guys want to hang out, happy to talk afterwards. If you have any specific questions for Andrea and myself.
I'm going to do a quick little plug for our next session. So thank you so much, Dr. Dutta-Koehler.
Oh, please call me Madhu.
Obviously, we know she's a busy woman. Also, next Wednesday, we are going to have Professors Josh Hassel and Terry Reagan. They're going to be talking about transportation. That is it's going to be on a Wednesday evening, August 5th. For more information and to RSVP for all our events coming up in this series, please visit the website you see on the screen here, www.bu.edu/the new possible city. So thank you. So I just wanted to do that real quick, just a friendly reminder.
Absolutely, and you know, we want to make sure that I think my talk was perhaps the most broad, if you will, of all of these. And as we go on to the other webinars, we are going to really get into specific sector-oriented questions about these innovations and what it means in sort of the current window of opportunity. We are, of course, going to look at this idea of pandemics and planning and how that comes together. Dr. Sungu is going to look at how data, how we look at data, analyze data, and how we can use that to make better, smarter cities. And by smart, we just don't want to speak about smart as being technologically smart, but smart as in being equitable and prosperous. And then I think the last one is a very, very interesting, well, all of them are fantastically interesting, and I'm going to be there for all, as is Andrea, but the last one is different. This is a short Q&A interview with Kwabena Kwe Agabo. I'm messing that up, but he is one of our faculty. He's a lawyer as well as an alumni, and of late he has been working with big mega projects of sustainability in Africa and particularly Ghana. And we are really looking at how Africa could look at, or countries in Africa could look at mega urbanization through people first understanding, so that sustainability and urbanization are not linked to economic development and numbers solely, but to the prosperity of the people. So this is all of it in a nutshell. We hope to see you all for future events if you can make it. Want to thank you so much, all of you. Hi, Charlie. I just saw Charlie. For making it today. And if you have any questions, Andrea and I are going to out here for about 5-10 minutes if you want to chat. Sounds good? Great. Thank you.
Thank you.